Hi, everyone. This is Wayne Williams, and welcome back to Adult Bible Studies. I'm glad to be with you today. This is an odd day for me to be teaching the lesson because uh, last Sunday, last Sunday's lesson, the 8th of August, was not able to be recorded. I had all kinds of technical difficulties and things that I just couldn't get the YouTube video uh, to work. But anyway, those have been resolved, I think. I pray. And we'll see if we can move on this week. So, this is the lesson that would have been taught on the 8th of August last Sunday. And that way we won't lose step with our series of lessons, and we'll be continuing to take them in order. This week's lesson is entitled Resignation, and it's from Job, primarily from the second chapter of Job. Last week we looked at the first chapter of Job, and we saw it began with an account of Job as a man who was very wealthy, very prominent, had been very successful, and a man who was very spiritually oriented, who had a very close relationship with God. In fact, his relationship with God was so good that when God called together a meeting of his heavenly council, he mentioned Job by name. I can't imagine God mentioning me by name. What a privilege! What a great thing to have happen to you. But here, Job was named by name by God, and the advocate, not advocate, the adversary, who was a part of the council, picked up on this and said, "Well, God, uh, maybe Job is not such a good guy, really. Maybe it's just that you treat him different than you treat other people. You've built this hedge around him. You've protected him. You've allowed him to have the resources to build and to build this kingdom and build all this wealth and affluence that he has. If you were to withdraw all that, I'm wondering if he would still be such a spiritually oriented and have such a good relationship with you." And God says, "Well, I think he would. I believe he would." And the advocate says, "Well, we'll see." I keep calling him advocate, but it's adversary because, in fact, in some scriptures, it's even translated as Satan. Though this is a different role than Satan, as we know Satan, the devil, the counterpart to God and his kingdom in this world. But nonetheless, he's the person on the other side of the debate team. He's the person who's always taking the counterpoint, who's always trying to add a little fuel to the fire and get people to thinking outside of the box. And that's a good role for you to have in a council. And God's wise to have someone filling that role. And yet, in this case, the adversary takes on some things that uh, seem a little atypical. And so that's one part of the book of Job that we have a little trouble with in our day and time, is understanding this adversary having this being empowered to bring the calamities on Job that he did. But nonetheless, that's the story. The adversary goes to earth, and he uh, presents Job with a series of major disasters. In fact, as we begin the first chapter of Job, we're told that Job has so many cattle and so many sheep and so many donkeys and so many oxen and so many servants who care for these animals and who are using them in different places to grow crops and to do things that build to his wealth and build his kingdom and supply support for all of these people, for Job and his family, and for all of these servants who work there. And during the course of this, after the adversary does his deed, uh, the calamities are brought upon Job, and one after another, messengers come in and say, "Job, I am bringing you news from, let's say, the northern frontier where your cattle were grazing. And I want you to know that a nearby tribe has overtaken your servants who were taking care of the cattle. They've killed all your servants and they've taken your cattle." Well, that would be a big setback and that would be a big problem. Well, here comes another messenger, and he says, "Job, I am the only one who's still alive that was among those who cared for your oxen. And we were using the oxen to plow and to do things, to carry goods and that sort of thing. And yet a tribe came upon us and they killed everyone but me and they took all your oxen. And over again, the account goes one messenger after another, until all of Job's physical things are gone, all of his possessions, all of his servants have been killed. And then the last messenger, as though that was not already enough, comes to Job and he says, Job, I hate to tell you, but your sons and daughters were together in a single house, and a great storm came upon them, and the house fell upon them, and they're all dead. At this point, Job responds in the first way that we look at as we study this book of Job. Our lesson writer has broken the book of Job down into stages of response, reactions that Job made to these calamities, to these suffering situations that were brought upon him. And in this first situation, we're told that Job rent his clothes, he shaved his head, he put on sackcloth and ashes, and he worshiped. So worship was Job's first response to suffering. Today we're going to look at his second response as we finish up that first chapter and look on into the second chapter. The last week ended with just this scenario of Job beginning to worship God. All these things have happened. It's all been taken away. He has suffered great loss, and yet his first response as a person of great faith, and with this relationship, depth of relationship that he has with God, is to worship. He turns to God. In this lesson today, we pick up with the very next verse that says, it gives us really kind of an affirmation of faith that Job uses as a part of his worship. I'm calling it an affirmation of faith. It's certainly not the Apostles' Creed like we use it often on Sunday in our worship service, but nonetheless, it is an affirmation because in it, Job recounts to God his understanding of how things are. And listen to what he says. Naked I came from my mother's womb. Naked I will return there. The Lord has given, the Lord has taken away. Bless the Lord's name. Job says as he worships, he does just exactly what we seek to do when we worship, and that is focus on God, not on myself, not on my needs, not on my world as such, but on God. And he comes to God and he says, Father, I realize I've got things in their right order here. I understand that everything I have is from you, and that I didn't bring anything into this world, and I'm not going to take anything out of this world. Your blessings have enabled me to have wealth and to have prominence and to have a good life and to have a family. And now that even those things have been taken away, I understand that those things were just temporary anyway. The things that we as humans worry about, fuss about, spend so much time commiserating over are just temporary at best. You are the author of the eternal, and it's you that I turn to. I came naked, I returned naked, and in between, what really matters is my relationship with you. And I understand that that's most important. Well, in chapter 2, we go on, and God has called his council again together again. And the adversary is there again, and God says, hey, have you considered my servant Job? Look at him. You put all these things on him, and he still has bowed himself and humbled himself before me and worshiped. True, sincere, heartfelt worship. Well, the adversary is not beaten yet, is he? He's not convinced yet. He says, well, yeah, but still, those were things outside of himself. I mean, his children were none, and that was a powerful thing. I agree, but still, it's not the same as having something inflicted directly upon you. I bet if I were to inflict Job directly, that he would then turn and curse you. And the adversary goes back to the earth and proceeds to do just that. He puts upon Job a scourge of sickness and sores. Listen to this. The adversary departed from the Lord's presence and struck Job with severe sores from the sole of his foot to the top of his head. The lesson writer says that he consulted with several doctors to see if they could diagnose or name the malady that Job had. And, most of them said, no, there's not any one thing that they can think of that would cause that kind of a thing. I've never had the shingles, but I've talked with a lot of people who have, and I can know how severe that can be sometimes. And so I thought of shingles when I thought of this. I thought, oh my, it's like just having a terrible case of shingles from the tip of your bottom of your feet to the tip of your head. And Job was just in torment. It says here that he took a piece of broken pottery to scratch himself, and he sat down on a mound of ashes. Sounds a little bit like an old southern boy like me. I can understand a little bit of that scratching. When we were kids, we seldom wore shoes in the summertime. We were out playing and doing all kinds of things. And one of the common things in Alabama, at least, is fire ants. I don't know if you've ever had the displeasure of encountering fire ants, but when you're barefooted and you're running around playing and you're not really watching where you're placing every single footstep, it's easy to get your foot in a fire ant mound. And it seems like it only takes a split second for hundreds of those little critters to get all over your feet. And they all, in one part harmony, start really stinging and attacking your foot. And it hurts bad enough when they're doing it, but even after you brush them off, maybe wash the foot down with some cool water, or maybe even put some salve on it, it still itches. It's a very toxic kind of sting, and it just can torment you for a long time. And you take your finger and you just touch that little spot, and just a touch sometimes brings a moment of relief. And you think, oh, and it's so hard. Moms and dads are always saying, don't scratch it, don't scratch it. You'll just make it worse. You'll get it infected. And yet every time you touch it, oh, there's just that moment's relief. Job, I can empathize with Job and his feeling what he was feeling, and it would be torment. And certainly it would be one of those kinds of things that you're not able to just put in the back of your mind and go on and do other things. It is one of those kinds of things that would just overtake you and keep you from being able to do anything else but think about how badly you feel and how badly those sores itched and hurt. And it's at that point, it's kind of like the previous account where all these things happened, and then as though that was not enough, the house fell on Job's children. Here in this case, as though this is not bad enough, Job is not in absolute torment. Here comes Mrs. Job. And when we hear, this is the only time she's mentioned in the book of Job. And yet the statement that she makes is, it kind of takes our attention for a while, doesn't it? Because Job's wife said to him, are you still clinging to your integrity? Curse God and die. My goodness. This is the woman that has bore this man 10 children, 7 sons and 3 daughters. They have shared their lives together. They have been together in health and wealth and welfare and the blessings of a great home and children. And yet to say something that sounds so callous, it makes you wonder about her, doesn't it? And maybe she was being very self centered in her comment here. Because you see, everything that had affected Job affected her almost in equal proportion. And maybe she saw Job as being the only one who had any input into this situation, and that surely if he would do whatever he could to end it, it would be over for her too. And maybe that's all she wanted, was for it to just be over. And she didn't even care about Job anymore. On the other hand, I think there's a possibility that this woman loved Job very much. He was her soulmate, and they had been together for their whole lives, and they had shared all these ups and downs of life and married life. And to be together long enough to have 10 children is certainly quite an accomplishment, certainly back in the days of Job. They'd been through a lot together. And maybe her heart was really just being torn apart, seeing this man that she loved go through such absolute pain and suffering and turmoil. Maybe she said this with all of the best intentions. Job, isn't it time to just let go and give up? Our title of our lesson is Resignation. That would be a type of resignation, wouldn't it? Just let go. Do like I've done, Job. Realize there's nothing we can do about this and just give up. Just curse God and give up. It's hard to imagine being Job. It's hard to imagine having this kind of counsel coming at you from someone who you love so much and who is so close to you in life. And yet Job turns to her, and in words of spiritual wisdom, he says to her, "You're talking like a foolish woman. You're talking like a foolish person." There's nothing about woman there that has any connotation here. You're talking foolish. And foolish is, in this word, it's not the same way that we interpret it in English. It doesn't just mean short sighted or ill advised or foolish in that sense. Foolish in the Hebrew sense of this word means to deny God. You are denying God. You're saying that God can't do anything about this. You're saying not only should I give up, but that God has given up. And while Job doesn't go into all that, it's clear that he's not giving up on God. Will we receive good from God, but not also receive bad? He says, wasn't it easy for you to worship God and to praise God and to be God's person in this world when things were going good? Isn't it likewise important for us to be in relationship with God now that things aren't going so good? For God has not changed. He is still trustworthy, He is still loving, and He will get us through this. It's God's choice. The purpose for this lesson is to evaluate our willingness to let God be God. It's not for you and I to question God, though we do, and that's a perfectly human response. And God's not bothered by that. He understands those questions, and He understands that they come from a sincere, hurt, broken spirit. But He also says, hang in there with me, my child. I'll get you through this. And he says that, Job says that to his wife too. Don't you remember all the good things God's done and can do again? He didn't say that, but that's the implication there. So what if for now things aren't going well? Trust in God, and He will see us through. The writer of Job says, in all this, Job didn't sin with his lips. Job may have entertained some thoughts. He may have entertained some times when he paused for a second and said, I just don't understand. But he also came back to the point that there are things about God that I may never understand. Likewise for me, there are things about God that I will never understand in this life. I look forward to heaven because in heaven we'll have that perfect insight. We'll have that sense of God and His presence and His will and His plan, and we'll see how it all comes together. And all these unanswerable questions that we've had in this life will be answered. And it will all be answered to the praise and glory of God if we but hold fast to that faith and that eternal hope that He gives to us. If we be resigned to the reality of letting God be God, working with Him as best we can, doing what we can, and yet realizing that sometimes, even in good times, there's nothing more we can do, and even in bad times, there's nothing more we can do. And that's where we have to be resigned to let God be God. Praise be to you. In this week, I hope that you can learn to let God be God and simply trust and receive His love and love Him back. For it's in His name we pray. Amen.